Regulated and Relational, a bi-monthly podcast brought to you by the Attachment and Trauma Network. In today's episode, Ginger and Julie are joined by Zaretta Hammond, nationally recognized consultant, educator, and author, to explore how culturally responsive teaching, neuroscience, and instructional equity intersect. Whether you're a longtime listener or joining us for the first time, we're so glad you're here. Season 6 promises to be an exciting journey, so let's jump right in and start this meaningful conversation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Regulated and Relational, our podcast produced by the Attachment and Trauma Network. I'm Julie Bean.
And I'm Ginger Healy.
And we're excited to share with you from both our personal experiences and our professional knowledge what it truly means to be attachment-focused, trauma-informed, and how we can help children impacted by early childhood trauma. Today, we have a very special guest in our studio. Ginger, please introduce folks to Zaretta Hammond.
Oh, with pleasure. Zaretta Hammond is a national consultant and author of 2 books, Rebuilding Students' Learning Power, Teaching Instructional Equity and Cognitive Justice, and another book, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, Promoting Authentic Engagement and Rigor for Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Students. I let a good friend borrow, and now I don't think I'll ever see it back, so it's on order again. Zaretta is a former high school and community college writing teacher. For the past 25 years, she's supported schools and other institutions in deepening their understanding and application of culturally responsive practices, the science of learning, and the science of reading. In addition, she has written articles and book chapters on these topics to help system leaders and instructional coaches support teachers to improve instruction. And outside of her passion for education and equity, she's a serious movie buff. She'll quote Lord of the Rings at every opportunity she gets. She's a native Californian living in Arkansas and enjoys hiking and riding. And we are truly honored to have you here in the studio with us today. So welcome, Zaretta.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. What a way to kick off the new year.
Exactly. Well, I can't wait to hear what movie quote shows up here.
I know. You never know. Yeah, no, this is the perfect way to start a new year and to talk about our upcoming conference. But before we get into all of that, I really want to dive into this connection between neuroscience and culturally responsive teaching. But before we even do that, I'm wanting you to kind of tell us got here. This is so unique and niche and beautiful and aligned with all ATN believes in and our mission. So maybe let's start there. What got you here?
Well, I was a teacher, a classroom teacher, but I taught writing and expository writing, not creative writing. I wasn't an English teacher that did a little writing on the side. My whole, job, in essence, was to help students become better writers. And that really was where I started to understand what it meant to help students own their own learning. And part of that really, because again, no amount of red pen was making their learning shift. It was just getting them more anxious. And for students who had already, not been successful and found a lot of anxiety in the classroom, it just amplified it. And so what I needed to better understand is, what does it mean for a student to kind of up level themselves, right? To get better, to be a more powerful learner. And in this case, a more powerful writer. Me just pointing out the mistakes in their sentences or their essays wasn't enough. They had to know how to fix it. And that wasn't just a knowledge thing, that was a skill thing, learning how to learn. So I started to really kind of roll up my sleeves and dig into what this meant in terms of what's the social neuroscience to get students to kind of, calm themselves so they can be present to learn, to the cognitive neuroscience to get into their zone of proximal development. I had to marry those two, and I had to understand how to help students actually connect this to what they already knew. This wasn't, oh, you don't know anything about writing. It's like, how do you help them kind of leverage what they already knew? And that's where the culturally responsive teaching comes in, because I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what culturally responsive teaching is. They've reduced it to relationships and cultural affirmation, identity affirmation, when
Mhm.
it's actually the way it was developed, probably at this point, 45, 50 years ago. It's not a new phenomenon. Um, Neuroscience was at the core. Dr. Asa Hilliard really championed that piece. And it's not the thing that typically gets lifted up. That we
Mhm.
know when we feel more competent, we develop more confidence. When we can
Yeah.
develop a sense of certainty that we can guide ourselves to the next level versus the uncertainty that produces more anxiety, then the brain has a tendency to get overflooded with cortisol. So I started to kind of leverage these principles, and now we're talking about it as the science of learning. And so
Mhm.
really just kind of leveraging that. Now, I can tell you, I was talking about brain science back in the day, and people looked at me like I had a third eye in the middle of my forehead.
We've been
Like,
there. Yes.
what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And so rather than try to convince folks, I just kind of, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So the experience that I was able to share in terms of the success of my students
Mm.
got me pulled out of the classroom more and more. And eventually, I just didn't go back. Teachers became my students. So
Mhm.
I've been a teacher educator probably, since that time, which is probably mid 1990s. I've
Wow.
been at it
Yeah.
a while. So it is nice to see this coming back fully around where we are talking about the social neuroscience. We're talking about the cognitive neuroscience, slightly more elevated ways. We still have a long way to go, particularly when we keep separating culturally responsive teaching. What is the connection between neuroscience and culturally responsive teaching? Well, there's no connection. They sprout from the same source. So the
Mhm.
more we get sophisticated in talking about it, I think we're going to see better results when we're using those techniques.
That's, yeah, that's awesome. And I know, I mean, you came on my radar when we took the neuroscience from the trauma informed stress reducing side of things and started as ATN into the into supporting educators. And so, because we had primarily 30 years ago been founded to support families and parents and children who'd been significantly traumatized. And so as we moved into that, it was like, oh my gosh, here is an educator who is who understands the neuroscience in such a deep way that that she's able to to show how it underpins everything. And that's that was important from ATN standpoint, because we know exactly we have that look you get when you start talking about neuroscience, and thankfully that we're getting less and less of that. Folks are understanding enough about the importance of knowing about your brain and how it works, and that things are related to how your brain operates. They're not just behaviors that children choose. They're not just
Absolutely. And
yeah.
here's what I would say is I think we're now at the point where we have to go beyond knowing. My
Mhm.
catchphrase is information is not transformation. So
Perfect.
this is a rut we are currently stuck in. Just
Mhm.
knowing about brain science, just knowing about these things, then we are all just spouting these things, but we don't actually think about how do I use these principles to change the conditions? How do I use these principles to inform my practice? Just like an engineer would. I need to
Mhm.
know physics. I need to know how to make a structure stand. I need to know what will undermine its integrity. And me knowing that doesn't build a bridge.
Right.
But it certainly means if I'm going to build a steady bridge, I need to know how to do those things. That's the next evolution of this work because it is not enough just to keep spouting trauma-informed practices. If I hear somebody just
Mhm.
say that, like somehow I know that, and yet and still what's happening in your classroom is
Yeah.
not in any way.
It's still stress producing. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you don't really understand how to create the environment. And that's
Right.
one of the chapters I wrote about in my new book, Rebuilding
Hmm.
Students'
Yeah.
Learning Power, is the idea that you have to create the dojo and classroom has to become a dojo, right? And the
Hmm.
dojo for what? For, being able to navigate trauma informed environment so that it does, become very helpful. But
Yes.
yeah, I think we are at the precipice of a really wonderful learning era for educators.
I'm so glad you said all of that because
Yeah.
I had written one of the side notes on the topics was that I I totally geeked out on the chapter where you talk about the four stages of change and what to do in the liminal spaces in your latest book because you nailed it. And that whole the unconscious incompetence, like when you know what you don't know, but then you are also in that trough, and sometimes it feels like we're constantly trying to pull people out of that trough. We know the information, but we don't know what to
Yeah.
do with it. Yeah.
That's right. And Julie, what's so important about understanding that, right? And that whole chapter about how change happens. Why
Hmm.
should we know that? Because for anyone, the liminal space, the space in between who you used to be and
Hmm.
who you're becoming,
Mm.
what you
Hmm.
used to know and are able to do, and what you will be able to know and do, is it feels nebulous. It feels like it is uncertain. It feels like there's a little fog. The
Right.
example, the metaphor I use in that chapter is like a trapeze artist who's let go of one bar and has yet to swing over and grab the other. There's a few
Yeah.
seconds where they're just hanging. And
Right. Yeah.
I
And
think
you
that's why
and
we're
you're
all.
thinking, could I fail and fall? And yeah,
Well,
all of
and I think the idea is if you have had an experience of that, that's how the brain works. It works
hmm
on experience. So it is going to try to preempt things. So if I've had an experience of failure, the minute I'm in a liminal space where I should be, I'm assuming that that's how I should interpret that.
right.
I'm in failure now. So now
Hmm.
I'm going to go into all these other behaviors. I'm going to assign meaning to this. If
Exactly.
we don't create that environment, then we aren't truly trauma informed. The informed part is I understand how to move people out of traumatic experience. That's
Hmm.
what trauma informed means. It doesn't mean strategies without the understanding of the design principles behind
Right.
it. And I think that's where a lot of teachers are. They're strategy stripping, right?
Hmm.
I'm like, oh, we do X, Y, and Z. We have morning meetings. Well, what if I have an emotion close to my learning episode where I'm
Hmm.
stretched and there's no time or space or opportunity or protocols? Well, I'm out of luck.
Right.
So, it works against our intention.
Yeah.
Hmm. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that need to be flexible, to pivot, to be present, and to meet the needs. I think that is really challenging for especially those who are driven by, you know, compliance or
Yeah.
the strategies and the outcomes and their own agenda, right? So,
I think you're absolutely right. The thing I would simply say to that is when we are striving to be trauma-informed practitioners, then we have to renounce those things. You cannot be driven by those things and still say, I'm doing trauma-informed practice.
Right.
Like those two are not going to mix because this is the responsive part of culturally responsive teaching.
Hmm.
So if I'm trying to create a culture of support through, moving through past experiences, then I am responsive to that. I understand these principles. And I think part of that is helping teachers not fall into these other things that press on them. It doesn't mean that they can ignore them because they
Right.
cannot,
They
but
can't.
they're
yeah.
going to
Hmm.
see progress faster if they actually use the design principles to be responsive.
Mm-hmm.
to the student in front of them. So
Mm-hmm.
responsiveness comes with presence, but it also means it's just not me blowing smoke at the student saying it's going to
Mm.
be all right. It's not
Right.
just relational. And that's what we get wrong about trauma-informed practice. We think it's just about having a better relationship and reassuring the child.
Right. Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to us more about that then, and also the concepts behind, I mean, that the concepts behind the pedagogy of compliance and where we are, in a lot of classrooms today versus where we need to go.
Well, I think, Ginger just spoke to it, that a lot of classrooms today are run out of a pedagogy of compliance, which means that there's an overemphasis on the management of behavior,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
again, um, behaviors can come up because a child may have had some traumatic experience that is long term, some kind of deep traumatic. And then we have the traumas with a small t, just something stressful going on. It's been a stressful day, and students don't necessarily yet have the tools to self-regulate.
Right.
So when we understand that, and a lot of school districts have organized learning around this kind of compliance. Let's have
Right.
quiet classrooms, everybody in their seat, speak when you're spoken to. So the teacher's doing most of the talking. If the student doesn't understand, there's not an opportunity to get clear. So now I just kind of go deeper into my uncertainty and
Mhm.
which raises my anxiety, right? There's this kind of process that we know happens. Or the teacher can be over scaffolding, so worried about the student experiencing something stressful because the teacher is aware of a traumatic experience in their history that they now become the sentimentalist, the poor baby syndrome. And now the student gets no stretch or challenge.
Mhm.
So that it is really, the understanding that the brain craves challenge, that, competence precedes confidence. And now, how does the teacher help the student have just the right amount of stretch that's commensurate with their capacity to live in that good stress? The thing I think
Right.
so important is not all stress is bad. And we have a tendency to think that, again, we've oversimplified what it means
Yeah.
to have
Mhm.
trauma-informed practice. Student
Right.
never has stress. We want to keep them happy. It's just all this stuff that
Mhm.
actually is not
Mhm.
helpful. So that pedagogy of compliance is in place because we are trying to hit our learning targets and get our test score numbers up and get the assessments, and we just need it systematized and regulated. Heaven forbid students would need to talk, or students would, that where real learning actually happens, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. No, that's huge. And it's just a huge reminder to the audience that not all stress is bad. I mean, we say that frequently at ATN, but it is really hard not to get caught up in that when you're like talking about trauma all the time, because traumatic stress is bad. But the truth is, if we had no stress, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. So
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's part of the process for teachers to really understand, right? And
Mhm.
so this is back to kind of the neuroscience. And when we start to understand these principles, the responsive part is how much does this student need? I know they need some, but what might be an okay amount
Right.
for one student might take this other student over the edge, right? And
Exactly.
Yeah.
so I think this is really about kind of understanding yourself as a practitioner, as an educator, as a teacher, right? And the
Mhm.
coach of learners, right? Teaching content is one thing, but coaching learners how
Mm.
to own their own learning, to have agency,
Mhm.
understand how to be more meta-strategic, and more metacognitive. Students who have traumatic experiences sometimes will disassociate. So you cannot be metacognitive if you've disassociated.
Right.
Metacognition is the very idea that I can pay attention to kind of what I'm doing right now. I may not know what new thing to do, but I am very aware of my current practice. And that might feel scary for some students to be
Yep.
Mhm.
fully present. So again, this is the responsive part. This is knowing something about how do you create that so you're not having to create these experiences one at a time for, you've got 30 kids and, maybe seven, eight, nine of them may have had some trauma. And
Right.
now I've got you're thinking it can be overwhelming. You don't have to do that. You can engineer a classroom where these supports over time teach students, to kind of reclaim their agency and, be present, to be more metacognitive.
I
Exactly.
love that idea of attuning to the student and their needs and and the stretching, but being aware of when to pause, when to stop, when to scaffold. I have certainly found myself in that where you talked about being sentimental or just, wanting to I don't know, wrap the student a little bit in bubble wrap, and not push them too far or too hard. I tend to lean that way. And so I love this idea of that's not helping, that's not helping them meet that potential and really start to lean on themselves to recognize what they need, that self advocacy piece too. I mean, you've just got
Yeah.
me thinking so many things that I
Yeah.
could really improve on here. I love it.
And that's the whole point is we all show up in a particular persona as an educator, and we have to know ourselves, right? Knowledge of self, because we come with our own traumas as well. And
Amen.
sometimes, getting in the classroom is, we're trying to work those things out, or there are triggers in terms of other behaviors, right? There's a lot of mirroring that goes on sometimes. So we have to be really mindful, right? The over scaffolding or the rescuing actually
Yes.
is dooming students to forever be on the wrong side of that zone of proximal development, right? They
Wow.
never get into the learning pit. They never learn to regulate their nervous system so that they can stretch themselves, because all cognitive growth comes through stretching, just like aerobic capacity. Well, if you're going to run a marathon, 26 miles, and all you can run is, two.
Yeah.
And for most of us, that is a long way, right,
Right.
to run. So you're going to have to build your aerobic capacity. You're going to have
Mhm.
to push it little by little, right? You would think, oh, I can go 2 miles. Look at me. Well, now you're going to have to get yourself to 5 miles,
Right.
and your lungs are going to burn. You're going to feel discomfort. You are going to have mental, challenges where you're going to want to give up. But you have to have someone who's teaching you in the moment how to
Mhm.
regulate those things. And then the dopamine payoff, the serotonin payoff, when you hit that target, like, shoot, I can do 5 miles now,
Right.
right?
Right. Pushes the
Absolutely. And
limit.
here's the thing, our brain has this thing called the progress principle, meaning, oh, you can do 5, but you're going to have to run 26. You got a ways to go.
Hmm.
But the brain's progress principle floods you with this knowledge that you are no longer where you used to be and you're
Right.
making progress. And that
Mhm.
Hmm.
progress gives you the fuel to go and now stretch yourself again. And now you see you're on the other side of that stretch and you didn't faint.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
right?
You survived and grew. And once you've done it once, it gives you that knowledge foundation, that resilience to stretch and do it
Yeah. And
again.
that's
Because
where that
we,
confidence comes from
And
that,
and the confidence comes because you notice and name it. Our brain, in
Mm,
addition to progress principle, has the negativity bias,
yes.
meaning it will focus on something negative with no prompting. But what we also know is in order to see progress or to acknowledge that we have made that progress or we did something that was like, oh, I'm getting better at that. We have to
Mhm.
do this thing called notice and naming. 90 seconds. You have to notice it, turn it over, look at it 90 seconds before your brain will accept that you did that okay. So again, if we're in a pedagogy of compliance and it's all about moving to the next thing, where are students having the moment to pause and to actually rewrite their explanatory story?
Mm,
Wow.
mhm,
Right? Because now
right.
this is part of the process. The student needs to rewrite their experience. So just having confidence or look what you did. If the student hasn't paid attention to it, they'll say, I never. It
Mhm,
always, right? This kind
mhm,
of universal language. So
mhm.
that part of it, that coaching learning versus just teaching content becomes so critical.
I love that. That's so wise and so, important for us to understand as educators that that's, you know, that we are in that coaching the learning brain versus, teaching the content, no matter how much
Yeah.
we love. I mean, some of us love the content very much.
Yes, we do.
But
And
so,
that can be the content. And this is what rebuilding students' learning power is all about. That learning how to learn is the content. And
mhm,
Mm.
it takes the learning sciences, it takes cognitive neuroscience, the principles, the thing people learn, and it now says this is how we use that information,
mhm,
not as strategy, but as design principles
yes,
to engineer the kind of environment, to engineer the kind of experience where students will bump up into it. This is what Maria Montessori understood. She
right.
called it the prepared environment, so that this takes the burden off teachers to think, I have to be the instrument of that student's growth, or I have to be the instrument that doesn't trigger the student back into whatever that traumatic
Mhm,
memory is, right?
mhm,
Is that I understand how I can engineer these things. And that idea of noticing and naming, it just really is kind of a lot of small movements to get the student to pause and notice and name it. But in, rebuilding students' learning power, that's chapter 6, 7, and 8. I
right.
Yeah.
actually try to break that down so it's not a mystery,
Mhm,
right? Because a lot of times we use words, but we really don't know the practices
mhm.
that we should use to coach that learning, but also that the practices we should be giving to students to enhance their learning how to learn.
Yeah,
Like
I
there
think
are
that's
two
the
things.
other thing I love
Yeah.
about this book, Zaretta. I mean, what's reflected back to me about your work is almost always people talking about your first book. But there's two things. One, my background is being a tech writer for engineers. So you start talking about design, and my mind goes all kinds of places, right? But I love the way you break it down and you explain things, because some of us who weren't lifelong educators don't know what this means, but we do after we, like you do a very good job of coaching us to coach through to become the learning coach and design that for
Yeah,
our
thank you
students.
for that. I'm glad that that comes through because it is a book to explain some things, but more importantly, how to do some things. So it comes
Mm-hmm.
out with a rollout plan. Here's what you want to do over the next 4 weeks. How will you introduce that new practice to students? Write yourself a script. Here are the details of writing a script. How do you engineer that environment? That's all of chapter 5, creating that
Mm-hmm.
dojo. Here are the key elements you need to keep in mind. I want,
Love it.
someone said, and I thought this was, quite a compliment. This isn't a book just to read. This is a book to use.
It is a book to use.
Yes.
Yeah, very
Yes.
much so. And we'll make sure that this gets linked into the show notes so that educators who are out there interested in this, if that's new information to you, will know exactly where to find it. And I can't recommend it highly enough. It's
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for that. Well, we're going to have a chance to go even deeper when I come and join you all for
yes.
the upcoming summit, which I'm
Yeah.
super excited
Well,
about. And
we're excited too. We called it the Learning Brain Exchange because for lots of reasons, because we wanted it to be focused on how our brains learn, all of our brains, the adult brains too.
that's
And we
right.
want it to be an exchange. So, it's all virtual. So it's a little bit hard for it to be an exchange, but we're working on all kinds of networking and Q&A sessions and other things so that folks that are attending can interface with folks. And I know that I know you're the person to kick this off, because your knowledge on the science of learning and on the connection between culturally responsive learning and trauma informed learning, and and all the neuroscience is really right on topic to what it is our teachers need to hear. So
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And this is, so important to kind of where we are in schools right now. And it's really, gratifying to know that you all as an organization are out there doing this and actually creating the opportunities for us as educators to come together and have more of this type of conversation that's practical, but also
yeah,
builds our knowledge. Because
yes,
again, without that knowledge, we can't even evaluate if something is just some pseudoscience
yes,
brain, you know, faux strategy, because there's
right.
a whole lot of stuff floating
There
around that's like
is. There
brain based. Like, what does that mean as opposed to what? The kidney based? What are we talking about here?
But you're right, because I have caught myself saying that a lot too,
Yeah,
and I know what I'm trying to say,
Right.
but is that being received or
right, right.
appropriately stated for what the message and the meaning?
Hmm.
I think there is a lot, there are mental models out there. The brain loves a shortcut. And so we have to be very mindful about the words we use so as not to build on misconceptions and the shortcuts teachers have. So this is why I am really mindful about language, right? Because teachers will think they know that. Oh, yeah, I know that. Or, oh, we had a PD on that. So
Right.
now they're very dismissive of something that is actually new or a practice, a new
Mhm.
application, or
Hmm.
correct application. So, I said this at the beginning of culturally responsive teaching in the brain. You have to make the familiar strange and the
Mhm.
strange familiar, right? You make the strange familiar by tapping into people's background knowledge and their schema and making that connection. Metaphors, analogies allow us to do that.
Right.
But
Hmm.
making the familiar strange is so important because we need to create space, a gentle
Yeah.
disequilibrium in our brain for new information to come through. That the
True.
brain really needs this equilibrium.
Hmm.
And if we don't create that, then we all think we're talking in the shortcut language, and we think we're saying the same thing or having a shared language and the same
Right.
understanding, and we don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think
I
that the
feel called
trauma,
out in such a good way.
yeah, I think that whole trauma informed arena, we can fall prey to that at this point. I
Yes.
mean, like
Yeah,
like 20 years ago, it was all very new, right? But now there's been enough shortcut that we have to be very careful as to
that's right.
exactly what it means. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And this idea of the pause for the students and for the adults, because somehow that feels uncomfortable to people to sit, to
Hmm.
pause, to feel it, to let silence kind of
Yeah.
be there. And there's so much there that is so powerful that you're talking about leaning into.
Yeah. And you know what I recommend to people, because for folks that have been through trauma, times silence is not always golden.
It is not comfortable.
And
Hmm.
and I write about this in Rebuilding Students' Learning Power, that there is this idea of the third space. This is, space, me, it takes up one, node of that space.
Hmm.
Another person joins me. Oh, we have two in a space. And the third space is the space between us, this empty space between us. When we are able to use manipulatives as a way to extend a conversation or to clarify a conversation or to work through some things, then it
Hmm.
makes it easier for us to be silent.
Hmm.
Because if
Mm.
we're silent, but there's still mental activity going on, that has to be discharged in some way or processed in some way.
Right.
And so this is why having those manipulatives, things that students can move around. I've been experimenting a lot with hexagonal thinking, right? What is the connection? How are you understanding this? As a way for students to be in that silence, but still processing, because
Hmm.
silence doesn't equal processing.
Yeah.
right? This is what we call there are a number of them that are called poor proxies for learning, right? Or
Mm,
instructional illusions. So this is the next level of the science of learning. It's
mm,
not just, oh, do this, is understand that is not learning. Understanding what learning is.
Mhm.
We talk about engagement a lot. Like,
mhm.
we just need traumatized students to kind of join the group and be
Mm.
engaged. And, engagement isn't learning.
Right.
And so there are a lot of ways we've shortcutted this to the point that we're very busy, but it's not resulting in
Mm,
the outcome we want, which is
right.
students learning and
Right.
students feeling like they're powerful learners. Not, I just got it right, and the only reason I
Yeah.
knew that is you graded my paper,
Right.
versus me having an aha moment because I was able to kind of connect some dots.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, and I'm thinking about our neurodivergent students who have differences in processing or differences in communications that, you know, there's some richness and beauty there that we can lean into that we haven't always as well, you
Well,
know.
and I think this is why it's really important not to lump everything into trauma.
Right.
Yeah.
And this
Exactly.
is another, kind of pitfall we fall into because
Mm-hmm.
again, you just lifted up that not all brains work a standard way. There's an
Mm-hmm.
atypical or, we're the normies if you're working this way, but really neurodivergence is on a continuum.
It
And
is.
so
Right.
I think in my mind, neurodivergence continuum takes the place of that old learning styles. That's already
Mm-hmm.
been debunked. And
Mm-hmm.
teachers are still saying that. Learning
Mm-hmm.
stuff like stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been debunked.
Yeah.
But when we talk about neurodivergence, how you process the nuances there's some people at the very end of really being divergent from the mean of
Mm-hmm.
humans in a classroom. They still have brains that are processing. It's not brain damage. That's
Right.
just
Right.
difference.
It's just
That's
different.
brain,
Difference.
that's difference is not trauma. The
Yeah.
trauma comes because we give them no other option.
Mm-hmm.
We are inflicting the trauma on students.
We sure can be at
My
times. Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah.
So I think the point you bring up is we want to have that deeper understanding so we can actually help any student on the continuum of neurodivergence.
Exactly.
And if indeed any student on that continuum has come with a traumatic life experience,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Which
we
many
still,
do.
which many do, we still can help them, right?
Right.
That those things aren't causal. Neurodivergence doesn't cause trauma, and therefore we're just going to lump you all in the trauma
Right.
bucket,
Right.
Ooh,
right?
thank you for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We
Well,
need more time.
Yes, we
I know.
do.
I
This
was
is a
thinking that
good
too. I was like,
convo.
dang, we're
Woo.
out of time, which is always the case.
It's
And
always
Yeah.
a good thing to be able to fill it up. And I know we're going to have a rich conversation
Yes.
at the Learning Exchange. So I'm looking forward to that.
we're looking forward to it as well. And we want to invite all of our listeners to check that out and to check out all of Zaretta's work. And yeah, that's we'll link
Yeah.
to Zaretta's website
Everything in
and
the
her
show
books in
notes
the show
and
notes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll both get our copies of culturally responsive teaching back from whomever. You just said that.
That's
I'm
right.
like,
Where
mine's
they
not on my
are. That's
shelf
right.
either. Like, where
I
Where
know.
is that? Absolutely. Yeah. And you can, people can find me at readyforrigor.com. That's my website.
okay.
And I really learn a little more about kind of the interplay between the science of learning and culturally responsive teaching. That's what I've really tried to do at that website. And of course, get the new book, get some friends, and,
Mm-hmm.
squat up and really dig into it to think about the small changes. And that's what I'll bring to the keynote is, really trying to invite people to think about small changes over time, because I talk about habit formation too. We want to make all the changes at once, do
Yes.
all the things, and it's like, but that's not how
Yeah.
learning happens. And
Mm-hmm.
so we'll talk about that as well, because I'm quite passionate about habit building and habit formation and behavior change. And at the beginning of the year, everybody's trying to get new habits. So,
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there'll be some great takeaways, and that's what everybody really needs. The now what.
absolutely.
So can't wait.
So
Well, thank
timely.
you.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Zaretta. I mean, and for being
Great
at the Learning
conversation.
Brain Exchange.
Indeed. I look forward to it. And you all be well.
Yeah, we
Thank
do. We do
you.
too. And thank you, audience, for listening in. We'll catch you next time.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Regulated and Relational. In our next episode, Julie and Ginger will interview Josh Novick, a licensed therapist in the Chicago area who is a national speaker about community healing after violence. A special thanks to Joe Kramer for donating the music. To learn more about the Attachment and Trauma Network, visit us at www.attachtrauma.org. I'm Lauren Cassis, and as always, thank you for listening.